Trump has been catching flack over the past few days. Trump has been catching flack because we haven't heard from him. He hasn't, this is the law and order candidate. This is the guy who said, I'm going to lead, I'm going to take control. And he hasn't been publicly doing that over the past few days. So people, even Trump's strongest supporters, have said, where is he? Where is he? Come on, Trump, give us something. And he rose to the occasion yesterday. Better late than never, and he did a really good job. There were 5 parts to what was actually a very short speech, but it was a brilliant speech. Whoever wrote it did a great job. And whoever delivered it, which was President Trump, did an even better job. Here are the parts. He opens up, doesn't open up with the rioters, he opens up with the inciting incident, which was ostensibly the death of George Floyd.
My administration is fully committed that for George and his family, justice will be served. He will not have died in vain. But we cannot allow the righteous cries and peaceful protesters to be drowned out by an angry mob. The biggest victims of the rioting are peace-loving citizens in our poorest communities.
So he has to open up with George Floyd. The reason he has to, because you might say now, look, these rioters have nothing to do with George Floyd. It's actually even sort of insulting that he would bring up George Floyd when he's talking about people burning down buildings and throwing stuff through windows, and they're totally separate events. Sure. But he has to reassure the country that he's taking the George Floyd death seriously. You and I know that he's been taking this seriously from the beginning. He made a statement about it from the beginning. His DOJ is investigating it from the beginning. The cop who was involved has been arrested and charged with murder. We know that. But people who only get their news from the mainstream media don't know that. Okay, so he's got to communicate. When he's communicating directly with the American people, he's got to give the whole story, even if some of that we already know. He opens up in this very humane, empathetic way with George Floyd. Then he moves on to what is happening now. Trump says he is mobilizing the forces to take back control of the country.
The following measures are going into effect immediately. First, we are ending the riots and lawlessness that has spread throughout our country. We will end it now. Today, I have strongly recommended to every governor to deploy the National Guard in sufficient numbers that we dominate the streets. Mayors and governors must establish an overwhelming law enforcement presence until the violence has been quelled. If a city or state refuses to take the actions that are necessary to defend the life and property of their residents, then I will deploy the United States military and quickly solve the problem for them.
Now, listen to the difference in language here. I will strongly recommend that the governors call in the National Guard. We will dominate the streets. So you get this kind of weaker language, this softer language, strongly recommend, and then in the very same breath, dominate. This word dominate keeps coming up in the way Trump is talking to these governors. They leaked audio of a phone call yesterday where Trump was speaking to the governors. He said, you got to dominate. He probably said the word dominate 10 times. We got to dominate, we got to dominate, we got to dominate. That's the key here. And yet Trump is being careful about this. Because if Trump said, forget the governors, I'm sending in the United States military, not the National Guard, the actual full-on uniformed military into the streets of our cities, and they're going to be ready to do what the military does, that's a very dangerous situation. Because you don't deploy the military unless you're willing to let the military do their job. And if the military does their job, they're going to kill civilians. And if the military kills civilians, even if it's justified, you are in a very, very intense political situation. That will not look good. Forget about an election year. That doesn't ever look good or justifiable, even in instances where it is justifiable. So Trump is in a tight position here. I wish he had used stronger language than I strongly encourage, but he is backed into a tight corner. So it becomes, I strongly encourage, call in the National Guard. A lot of them have already called in the National Guard, but if they do not do it, I will send in the troops. And by the way, I am already calling in the United States military to Washington, D.C., because obviously Washington, D.C. is run by the federal government in the District of Columbia. He then moves on. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to send in our boys in uniform. Next step, what are we going to do to the bad people? Antifa, the looters. Trump addresses them next.
Those who threaten innocent life and property will be arrested, detained, and prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law. I want the organizers of this terror to be on notice that you will face severe criminal penalties and lengthy sentences in jail. This includes Antifa and others who are leading instigators of this violence.
The Antifa mention here is important because a lot of the people who are involved in the violence are members of Antifa, which is it's so-called anti-fascist. It gets its name from a group of German communists from the 1930s, and they are just as radical as German communists from the 1930s, and they are a domestic terrorist organization. I ran into Antifa when I was giving a speech at the University of Missouri, Kansas City a couple years ago. I was giving a very controversial speech. It was called Men Are Not Women. It was just kind of shocking stuff. And some wacko Antifa guy busts in a bandana. That was before our public health officials forced us to wear bandanas all the time. And he busts in, and fortunately for me, he just had a super soaker. It was full of a bunch of creepy household chemicals, and all he did was manage to ruin my blazer, but otherwise I escaped fine. That is not what Antifa's resting at around the rest of the country. Now around the rest of the country, Antifa is using weapons that are stronger than squirt guns. Terrorists target civilians to achieve political ends. That's the definition of terrorism. That's the simplest definition of terrorism. Antifa fits the definition of terrorism perfectly. It is a scandal that Antifa has not been designated a terrorist organization yet. Very good that Trump did it a few days ago. Very good that he called them out in this speech. Now, there were other people who have been committing a lot of looting and violence and crime, who were not in Antifa. Trump did not name them. Probably this was a political decision. You got to pick your battles. You got to focus on the threats. And the broader, longer-term political threat, political violence threat has been Antifa. So he calls them out. Trump gets to the best line of the speech. This is the thesis of the speech. He's not just addressing the individual concerns anymore. He's getting to his broader point about government, liberty, order, and justice.
America is founded upon the rule of law. It is the foundation of our prosperity, our freedom, and our very way of life. But where there is no law, there is no opportunity. Where there is no justice, there is no liberty. Where there is no safety, there is no future. We must never give in to anger or hatred. If malice or violence reigns, then none of us is free.
This is some seriously sophisticated stuff. For the people who make fun of Trump and say Trump doesn't know anything about political philosophy, Trump doesn't know, he doesn't believe anything, he's just a reality TV show host. Okay, fine, maybe not. But even if that's true, then he is hiring some really sophisticated political thinkers. And he is having those really sophisticated political thinkers write his speeches. And he's sophisticated enough to know when he sees those speeches that they're saying something very important. We have been conned in this country, not just over the past 5 days, but over the past 5 decades, to believe that liberty is to be found in just doing whatever you want, pursuing all your own appetites, me, it's all just about us individually. We've been told this certainly from the left and even a fair bit from the right. And that isn't true. There is a relationship between liberty and justice. James Madison in Federalist Papers said that the end of government is justice. It's not just liberty. It's not just this kind of shallow idea of liberty of doing whatever we want. It is justice, okay? Edmund Burke, the great conservative philosopher, said that another word for ordered liberty is justice. There's this relationship here. You can't have... So I think little children believe that if you have laws, then you don't really have freedom. I actually thought this. I thought, this is a free country. How come there are laws and there are rules that we have to follow? That's what little children think. Then some people just remain little children all their lives, and then they join groups like Antifa, and they riot with groups like Black Lives Matter, and they remain children until the end of their lives. When people grow up, though, they realize, no, actually, you need rules to have liberty. You need order to have liberty. You need rules in poetry to have a beautiful sonnet, and you need rules in society to have a beautiful society where everybody has an exalted freedom. And then Trump embodied this. He actually put this into his own flesh and action when he said, okay, this is my thesis on liberty and justice and order. Now I'm going to go pay respects to a very special place. And he left us on a cliffhanger. What is that special place?
Thank you very much. And now I'm going to pay my respects to a very, very special place. Thank you very much.
And okay, you see him, he walk. He just walk. He leaves. He drops the mic. Okay, I'm going to go pay my respects to a special place. Walks out. And then he just walks out the front door to the White House. I think most people didn't even know the front door of the White House worked. You don't see people coming in and out of there too much. He then walks, leading a group of people, including the Attorney General, Bill Barr, including serious people. Ivanka's back there. He walks across Lafayette Park, leading it, right? He's not behind the 10 Secret Service agents. He's leading because he has to. This guy gets stagecraft. He gets optics. He walks across the park to St. John's Church, the church that the rioters had set on fire the night before. And he walked to the front of St. John's Church and he held a Bible up. He held that Bible up in his right hand. Didn't give a big speech, just held the Bible, the symbol of that, the image of Trump standing holding the Bible up in his right hand in front of the church that they tried to burn down. Is a beautiful thing. It's a beautiful thing because it tells us about the rules and the order that we need to have freedom. John Adams said, "Our country is built for a moral and religious people. It is unfit to the governance of any other kind of people." And then the other implicit message here in what Trump is doing is exactly what we said on this show yesterday. We said, hey, let's zoom out a little bit. Let's remember, why is racism bad in the first place? Why do we all agree that racism is bad? Most people can't answer that question. The reason that we think racism is bad, the reason that we in our society, unlike every other society that has ever lived, the reason we uniquely think that racism is bad is because of Christianity. Because Christianity shaped our society. Man is made in the image of God. We descend from a common ancestor. There is human dignity and there is human solidarity. We uniquely believe that. And Trump showed that. And of course, the left was furious. Hey, Michael Knowles here. And the fact is, a life of cigars and scotch does not come cheap. So please be sure to subscribe to the Daily Wire on YouTube, because I depend heavily on your support to continue this wonderful lib-triggering life. Thanks.